Hello, welcome back to the Nook. I'm Daniel, and today I'll be reviewing this book here, The Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien. So right away, I'll just get into the description, just so it gives you some idea about what the Silmarillion is, and then I can kind of launch into my review and just touching on my favorite parts of it, and yeah, so here we go. The Silmarilli were three perfect jewels fashioned by Fëanor, most gifted of the elves, and within them was imprisoned the last light of the two trees of Valinor. But the first Dark Lord Morgoth stole the jewels and set them within his iron crown, guarded in the impenetrable fortress of Angband in the north of Middle-earth. The Silmarillion is the history of the rebellion of Fëanor and his kindred against the gods, their exile from Valinor and return to Middle-earth, and their war, hopeless despite all the heroism against the great enemy. In it is the ancient drama to which the characters in The Lord of the Rings look back, and in whose events some of them, such as Elrond and Galadriel, took part. The book also includes several shorter works. The Ainulindale is a myth of the creation, and in the Valaquenta, the nature and powers of each of the gods is described. The Akallabeth recounts the downfall of the great island of Numenor at the end of the Second Age, and of the Rings of Power tells of the great events at the end of the Third Age, as narrated in The Lord of the Rings. Um, yeah, and then it just gets into the illustrations that are in this book. It's illustrated by Tolkien himself, and it kind of talks about that stuff. So that's the basic story. It's called the Silmarillion because it deals with the Silmarilli, and there's kind of a creation story that happens at the very beginning that I find fascinating. Just kind of how Iluvatar, who is the god of Middle Earth, he creates the world by singing it into being. And Melkor, who becomes the first Dark Lord Morgoth, he essentially sings discord into the song. It's kind of like the creation story where Satan brought discord into the garden by tempting Adam and Eve as a serpent, which I think it's very cool how he kind of did that myth. So after you read the myth story, you kind of read about the Valar, who are like the gods of Middle Earth. And what's cool about the Silmarillion is that each chapter is essentially its own story. So you start with the creation myth, then you have just talking about the Valar, and then it gets into the Silmarillion itself, which is the story of the wars that happened because of these jewels. So I will just say, some people say the Silmarillion is hard to get into because it's not a big book, right? Like it's the same size as The Hobbit, just over 200, almost 300 pages. It's not huge compared to Lord of the Rings, but it is very dense. It's written like a history book. But I would say if you can read the Bible, specifically Genesis in the Old Testament, the Silmarillion isn't that much different. Just like how the Bible has great stories of heroism and just a history, I would say the Silmarillion has a lot of that too. And some stories are better than others. One boring story just kind of talks about the lay of the land, just kind of landmarks in Middle Earth, and it's not very exciting. Whereas there's the story of Beren and Luthien, which is a beautiful love story with tragedy and triumph. There's the story of Turin Turambar. There's the story of the fall of Gondolin. There's a lot here. There's a lot to dig into. So I would say, keeping it spoiler free, I think my favorite story is The Tale of Turin Turambar, which is also told in a book called The Children of Húrin. So basically, Christopher Tolkien, who got the Silmarillion published in his lifetime, because he died, I think, in 2020, in his lifetime, Christopher Tolkien published other books that kind of embellish stories from the Silmarillion. So you have The Children of Húrin, you have Beren and Luthien, The Fall of Gondolin. I recently read The Fall of Numenor. I think that was good too. And the Silmarillion just kind of touches on these various stories about characters. You get the elves, you get the men, the dwarves. You learn a lot about the gods. There's sort of a god of the sea, there's a god of the earth. It's very fascinating stuff. And it's interesting to think about the history of the Silmarillion because Tolkien had all of these notes, all of these ideas, this whole language, this whole mythology, and he wanted in his lifetime to get the Silmarillion published along with The Lord of the Rings. And his publishers were like, well, no, this is too huge. You can't do this. This is too much. And it's really sad that he never got to see it published. But it was actually, what I learned was that Christopher Tolkien got it published after Tolkien's death, but also he was helped by the Canadian fantasy author Guy Gavriel Kay, who, I mean, one day I could review some Guy Gavriel Kay on my channel because he is very good. Um, Yeah, so I can't say too much more about it except it's very good. If you're wondering about the standout stories, Beren and Luthien is really good. The Turin story is really good. Fall of Gondolin, Numenor. I mean, there's a lot here that you can really dig into. So if you are on the fence about it and you've read The Hobbit, you've read The Lord of the Rings, maybe like me, you've read them many times, I would say definitely go for the Silmarillion. It's worth it. I've read it 5 times, especially because I read it every year. And at the moment I finished that, I finished The Hobbit, and I'm almost done this Fellowship of the Ring. So just to let you know, my next review will most likely be The Hobbit. That'll be really fun to dig into. It's one of my favorite stories. After The Hobbit, I'm going to review The Lord of the Rings. It's one big book that I own, but I'm going to review it first as Fellowship, and then the week after, when I'm done the Fellowship review, I could review Two Towers and then Return of the King. So there'll be kind of 3 separate Lord of the Rings reviews, kind of like treating it as an actual trilogy. Because I know Tolkien intended Lord of the Rings to be one story, so it kind of can be read as such. But I just want to say I love Tolkien. I love his works. He's my favorite fantasy author. And The Silmarillion is just a brilliant story. It's really well written. There's a lot of good characters. Some stories are not as exciting as others. But if you're interested, definitely give it a go. I'd say it's worth it. And for now, I would just say leave a comment what you think of The Silmarillion if you've read it, if you haven't, or if you're now interested. And remember to like and subscribe. And remember, you're always welcome at the Nook. Bye.